Whatever your dream is, whatever your vision is for the kind of people, the kind of farm, the kind of thing that you want to get close to whatever that is. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what that looks like, what that feels like, what that experience is in your soul, in your heart feels like. Seek that out, find it, invest your time and interest, and you'll never regret spending time with mentors. You'll never regret that. Welcome, everyone, to another Beyond Labels podcast with yours truly, Joel Salatin, the farmer, and Dr. Sina McCullough, the brains of the outfit. Thanks for joining us. And we've got two announcements quickly to make before we get into the podcast today. The first one is that our 2 Days of Truth Summit that was held recently at Polyface. How can you get that, Sina?
So there's a link included in the description box below the video or podcast, where you can click on that link and it takes you to the page to learn more about what you'd be getting as part of the summit and how to purchase it.
Great. The second announcement, which is a lot bigger, is that we have now for a year been doing these podcasts, just kind of dipping our toe in the water. It's kind of grown. It's grown kind of beyond, I think, certainly beyond what I envisioned. And there are technicians, there are things that need to be paid behind the wall. And so Sina and I have talked about how do we pay for technicians, editing, things like that need to be done. And neither one of us has been comfortable with advertising. We just don't like it. It gets you in this quagmire of who do you endorse 100%. You feel like a mercenary. I mean, it just doesn't jive with what we're into. Both of us love pay for what you get. That's kind of our libertarian bent, and so we like pay for what you get. And so, as you know, many podcasts have gone to a subscription service, and so we're going to head that direction. And so we're doing a kind of a 5-week ramp up to that. And I'll let Sina give you a few more details about the subscription service.
Great. Thanks, Joel. I'm super excited about this. For those of you listening, you might be interested in knowing that Joel wasn't originally going to be my weekly co-host, right? So I brought this idea to Joel about starting a podcast based on Beyond Labels. And I was going to be the host, and Joel would only occasionally come on the podcast because I knew how busy he was. Right, Joel?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
I kind of roped him into it, as he says. So basically the idea was, okay, you'd only have to come on once a month, and be my co-host, talk about things. Well, then we did that, and everybody loved the back and forth dynamic between us, just like we have in the book. And I said, well, Joel, people really like that dynamic. Maybe you could come twice a month. And
do I detect a slippery slope here?
It's like a kid, right? You give them a little bit and they're going to ask for a mile.
Give her take a mile. Yep.
That's right. I just kept trying to test the boundaries there. Yeah. So eventually he ended up on agreeing to every week, right? Once we started getting traction and we started to get into a groove. And now this is super exciting because Joel has embraced the podcast so much, it's now on his resume. So he's all in. And so now that we know the direction that we're going, now that we're both, committed to this all in, now is the space where creativity comes and it flows. So we've decided to invest actually even more of our time and to share more of our personal lives with this community that we're building through the subscription service. So it's only going to cost $5 a month. You'll get access to all the podcasts and the video versions of the podcast. We'll have a live quarterly Q&A session. It's Ask Us Anything session. We'll have behind the scenes videos of Joel on the farm, behind the scenes videos of me, particularly cooking videos that people have requested, like with herbs, for instance. We'll have a discount offered to our annual summit. It'll be 10% off. That's our annual 2 Days of Truth Summit at Polyface. And we're going to leave the option open for being creative and flexible based on what the tribe that we're creating wants. For instance, right now we're hearing they want more on how to rewire the nervous system, what steps are involved. So I will be posting short videos with exercises of how to rewire your nervous system, for instance. So it's a community space for like-minded people to get together in an area where we're trying to get away from the censorship, and we're trying not to support those platforms that censor. And it's a space for all of us to communicate and to grow so that we can keep providing new and fresh content and not be censored.
Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. We don't want to belabor this, and we are going into this, a little bit fearful, but also recognizing that we need to do this in order to create sustainability within the podcast. So please, we thank you for your continued loyalty, your continued interest in what we do. We will do our best to make sure that this is the best investment you've ever made. And thank you for, again, just thank you for your interest and for sharing this with other people. We'll let it grow. Where, we kind of feel like this is kind of our weaning. We've had this little infant and we're just starting to toddle a little bit now. And we need some support mechanisms, some things to hold on to, like a toddler needs a chair leg. We need a chair leg in the podcast here to be able to pay the folks and the techniques and the things behind the scenes and the lack of censorship platform to be able to move this forward. So thank you. And we'll be talking more about this in the future, but we don't want to belabor the point. Now, Sina, we're ready to jump into the podcast. What do we have for today?
So we have another question for Joel. Again, this comes from Christine from Heritage Pines Farm. In the last podcast, we addressed two of her questions, one on identity, one on cultural nuances. And we decided to go ahead with the final two questions that she posed. Just as a reminder, Christine is a first-generation Taiwanese American immigrant, now a first-generation farmer, and had a come to Jesus moment when she was advertising how to get Hispanic moms to buy more Coca-Cola for their kids. And now she and her family are running a small regenerative farmstead outside of Colorado Springs. So here is her next question: when to do it perfectly or when to just do it? One thing I've encountered and had to wrestle with in our family journey of farming is to view failure and learning from failure as integral parts of what we're doing. This is not something that I was familiar with in my education or career. In school and on the job, I'd always been patted on the back for getting the job done right as quickly as possible. There were always metrics, data, feedback, and so forth to easily measure one's success. But since we're so new to farming, we often don't even know if we're doing it, quote unquote, right. For example, rotational grazing. I understand every piece of land in every climate is different. We invited a county extension small acreage specialist to help us figure out how to rotationally graze our land. She told us we can only handle one cow on our land. We currently have 4 cows and we feed a lot of hay, but we love our grass-fed raw milk, and it's nearly impossible to find grass-fed raw milk in our area. Are we doing it right? I don't know. Should we just not do it at all? When do you go for it? And when do you call it quits? What are the benefits of, quote unquote, failing in farming? What was your worst failure that you can share? And what are the best lessons that you have learned from, quote unquote, failing?
That's a loaded question. It's a great question. Thank you for asking. And so let's tackle these things one step at a time. I think the first one I'm going to tackle is this idea that the extension specialist said you could only had enough land for 1 cow and you have 4 and you buy a lot of hay. I can hear the angst coming through the question. Is this right? Is this wrong? What is it? We could all sit around in a focus group all day and talk about the relative ecology, economics, carbon footprint, whatever, of this hay. The reality is that all of us are in a context now, Sina, as you know, we're not in Laura Ingalls Wilder context. You know, if you've read the Little House on the Prairie books, and Paul said, "We don't need any cash. I'll build a door without nails." You know, and this is before the Internal Revenue Service was started. I mean, you got to understand that this country, throughout human history, there hasn't always been an Internal Revenue Service or a Federal Reserve. I'm getting a little bit far afield here, but we live in a very cash-oriented society. Wealth here is cash. There are, in the Native American culture, it was wampum and seashells. Okay. In fact, I'd like to go back to that. That would suit me just fine. Other cultures, it's, wealth is a cow. Other cultures, of course, it's other things. But we live in an extremely cash-oriented society. So here you've got this young family. They're starting out on this little farm. They're trying to be, they're trying to be business smart, business savvy, and one cow isn't going to do the job. But because hay can be acquired fairly cheaply, they can leverage their marketing savvy and their value-added savvy on commodity hay and be able to get enough volume to pay the taxes, pay the insurance, and put shoes on their children's feet. It's kind of like us here at Polyface. We run the egg mobiles behind the cows. Well, the egg we don't need 800 chickens following the cows to do the pasture sanitation, the birds following the cow thing. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of chickens to be able to do that. But the cost of going out and moving the egg mobile and gathering the eggs every day is the same. That the cost of being there is the same, whether we're going out to service 100 chickens or 500 chickens. So because of the cost of fuel, because of the cash cost of time, we run way more chickens in the egg mobiles than we need to behind the cows in order to bring in $100 worth of eggs and not $20 worth of eggs for the time of fuel and investment and time getting there. It's an identical question. So we're quick to say, So what's the trade-off? The trade-off is we buy more feed. If we had only 50 chickens in there, back when I first started the idea, we only had 100 chickens in the egg mobile. They pretty much lived off the land. They got bugs and grass seeds and things and lived off the land, didn't eat anything. But the problem was I had all this time investment in just 4 dozen eggs a day. Well, the trade-off then was to go up with way more chickens. So when I'm spending the time hooking it up with the tractor, bringing in the eggs, that time and that fuel gets paid for with the volume. The trade-off is we supplement with some off-farm grain from neighbors who grow grain in order to supplement the chickens to get the volume up enough to pay the fuel bill to go move them. That's the idea. And Christine, you're in the same situation here. I would love to not have to generate cash. I would love to not have to pay $30,000 in insurance. I would love to not have some of these huge cash things that we have in our culture. But that's the context we're in. I'd love to not have half my salary confiscated in taxes. I would love to live in it, but we don't live in that kind of world. And so, Christine, you are going through the kind of compromises, and I have fun with this. I say, yeah, this is my hypocrisy. This is we just admit it, enjoy it, smile about it, and say every single one of us, non-farmers included, we pick our hypocrisies. We do. All of us have our inconsistencies. We say we believe this, but then at the end of the day, we really do eat that ice cream cone, and we don't ask where it came from because it's hot and we just want something cold and wet and we eat the ice cream cone, right? And so that happens. And so let's not get too self-deprecating about this and realize that we've got to make a go in our context. You have a context, your family has a context, and you have to make a go within that context. And perfection is incremental. You never achieve perfection. What you only achieve are incremental steps toward a paradise that you seek. And so if you ever arrive, well, then, quit living, because there's nothing more to improve. So I'll leave you with this on the question, that one of my favorite things that I promote is the idea, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first. We've grown up with this: if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Well, that's really actually wrong. What's right is, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first, because we don't do anything well first. We don't talk well, we don't walk well, we don't I guess we poop fine. We just don't know where to put it. You put in a diaper, you got to learn that. We got to learn these things, right? And it's an incremental journey. And so if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first.
That's hilarious. I've never heard anybody equate learning how to farm to learning how to poop right. That's my memorable moment from this podcast. And let me ask you, one of her questions in that line of questions she listed is, what was your worst failure that you could share, and some of the best lessons you've learned from failing? So you covered the lessons, but in terms of, this probably wasn't one of your worst failures, but this came to mind when I read that question. When I was at your farm recently, you took me in the four-wheeler, kind of behind the scenes tour, and we drove by some pastures, and you said, I forgot what you called them, but they were like pastures where you had like failed. You had tried different techniques for farming, and those were failed, and they were like set aside now so that they could restore themselves, grow back. So could you share that? Because that was, Hilda was with us, Holistic Hilda was with us, and both of us looked at each other like, wow, most of us have this vision of you, Joel, as just, you're this premier farmer. You're like the poster child for regenerative farming, truly. And so we look at you as just having this vast wealth of knowledge, and almost as though you were perfect from the beginning, right? You don't make any mistakes. And then when we drove by there, and you're like, oh yeah, that's where we failed, did such and such. And remember, everyone was kind of silent in the car. And I asked you some question along the lines of, well, what do you mean? Like, it didn't work? Like, what? So could you share that a little bit about that story? What are those pastures that are on your farm, and how did you fail?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are numerous ways that you can fail. For example, if you get a 3-inch rainstorm and you pug it up, pugging, where the cows tromp it all up, for example, you get nothing but weeds for a year, and then 2 years down the road, you get these wonderful clovers and timothy and things, and so climatic changes, soil changes, the way the land lays, every little nuance, it requires, it has a different fragility, it has a different risk factor, and it has a different response factor, the way that you work with it. And so, you can abuse something momentarily, you can walk away too long, and then saplings come in, and then you've got to go in with a chainsaw and bring it back. These are mistakes that you can make, and so we've made those. Whenever anybody asks me for what's your biggest failure you ever did, for me it was trying to make a portable sheep corral out of PVC. I had this idea that if we made, we're not fenced for sheep. Sheep require a lot more fencing than cows, electric fencing. And so I wanted to have some sheep. And so how do we have these sheep, but we don't have to refence the farm, because that's a pretty big investment and a big deal. And so I conceived of this great big, like a 30-foot by 50-foot PVC corral that you could just pull across the pasture, and it would just slide, and the sheep would be in it. and you could just move it a couple of times a day if you needed to, and they just slide across the pasture. So I went down and got some really expensive Schedule 80 PVC. That's the gray stuff that's like, half an inch thick walls, really, really big. Spent, $3,000. Brought that stuff in, glued it together, built this thing, and we got it done. And it was not a really cold morning, but it was chilly. It was in the 30s. Got it done. I hooked up to a tractor. I pulled it about 5 feet, and it cracked. The PVC cracked. It was chilly, and literally, I mean, it was 10 seconds. Now look back. Well, that's not going to work. And we threw the whole thing away. I mean, $3,000 just like that. And so from that, we learned that was our final straw, that you never build something out of PVC. PVC is for water. PVC works really well for plumbing and water and that sort of thing. But you never build anything out of PVC. We've tried chicken shelters. We've tried icosahedron domes. We've tried all sorts of things out of PVC. They all crack. They break. You can't fix them. The UV radiation breaks down the PVC. It gets brittle, and it's just no good. So so those are that. That's the lesson to learn. Don't build anything out of PVC. Use wood, steel, rubber, bungee cords, duct tape. I don't care, but just don't use PVC.
No, that's awesome. All right. So do we have time for
for
her
the
last
final question? Yeah, her last question. Yes, let's do it.
Okay, last question coming from Christine as well. This is about mentorship. How important is mentorship for those who are new to farming? How do we build a culture of mentorship in our new farming, homesteading communities? One of the things I discovered early on is that because I literally knew nothing about farming, I needed to seek out in-person mentorship. Books and Google and YouTube are great, but I had literally never been around a cow, and I knew that needed to change. So I begged some acquaintances to let me shadow them on their farmsteads. They became some of my closest friends. Mentorship is also one of the reasons we chose to purchase registered animals from specific breeds. I know Joel recommends against exotic fancy breeds, but as someone who originally couldn't tell a bull from a steer, which by the way, I don't know how to tell a bull from a steer. She does.
It's between his legs.
Really? I'm thinking maybe there's some like markers, like descriptive on the horn, something. No, that's it.
He's either got them or he don't,
Oh.
So a steer is without gonads. You've taken them out. And for sure, one of the most common things is that a bull has horns and a cow doesn't.
Oh, see, that's what I was thinking. Look at the horns.
Horns do not make him horny. Horns have nothing to do with horniness. Horns are breed specific, not sex specific. There's plenty of cows with horns. Horns have nothing to do with the sex of the animal.
I'll get back to the question. Just hold on. Joe, we should do a kids curriculum with you doing the farm animal, me doing the nutrition in the health to the plate, because I didn't know that. I literally thought it was probably something with the horns, but now it's just like identifying with the human, or, well, I guess that's now controversial. Who knows? But the traditional way to identify. But yeah. Okay, I digress. So let me get back to her question.
On bovines, if you look between the back legs, a bull has balls and a cow has an udder. All right, that's the way you tell. It has nothing to do with what's up on the head.
Okay. Oh wow, kind of a bummer that I've been wrong all these years. But
yeah.
See, I learned something new every time we chat. I learned something new. But okay. So back to Christine. Okay, she couldn't originally tell the difference between a bull and a steer, so she purposefully sought out animals that were registered because the breeders tended to care more. And if she did research on the breeders, that she knew that she was getting a solid animal. On top of that, she could reach out to them with questions. and they responded immediately from her texts and her calls. She asked, when is the value of mentorship worth the additional cost? That's a great question.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of mentorship. I mean, anybody that knows us, knows that I'm running, that we here at Polyface, we have a very formal stewardship and apprenticeship program. And so we are absolutely key on mentorship. Nothing beats being able to see it done, to actually experience it, put your hands on it and see it done. When is it valuable? I think exactly what in the question, Christine's doing exactly the right thing. She's investing in relationships. That's what you're after. And I know that in my life, I had wonderful mentors, and my dad was my first, mentor. And then, Alan Nation, founder of Stockman Grass Farmer, was, my second mentor. We had another guy here that started a company, an organic agriculture supply company named Reed Putney. He was a third mentor. AP Thompson at Golden Acres Orchard was certainly a mentor. I mean, I can just go down this list of these folks who mentored me. And it wasn't necessarily that we got together, a certain time a year or whatever. It was just this was an experienced person who would either give you a little bit of a congratulatory message, or if I were doing that, you might think about this, something that gentle. But when you have a lot of wisdom and experience, that little side word, that little side advice can make a huge difference in an operation. And so my answer to when is the value of mentorship worth the additional cost, my first response is always the value of mentorship is always worth the additional cost. And so don't ever shy away from those mentorship things. Many of my mentors I've never met in person, but I've met them through books and that sort of thing. So, Alan Nation used to tell me, he said the best investment anyone can ever make is to increase their knowledge level about what they're doing. And that included books, and of course now we have YouTube. That wasn't around when he was alive, but yeah, mentorship is always worth it. Cultivate those relationships, and what you're experiencing is exactly the way mentorship works. So well done, congratulations.
Well, and a follow-up question on that is, I would say it's always worth it when you have a good mentor, right? So if somebody doesn't currently have a mentor and they're in this, farming, homesteading space, and they are looking for a good mentor, how would someone go about finding one?
Yeah, so what you want to do is find someone who's doing what you want to do. Dave Ramsey, the financial guy, talks about the proximity principle. Get yourself nearby the person or persons who is doing what you want to do. What do you aspire to do? Look, if you go on a farm and it stinks and it's ugly and they got sick stuff all around, a bunch of fungus and mildew and whatever, that's probably not the kind of farm that you want. You want to go to a farm where the animals are healthy looking and slick, where the tomato plants are robust and tall, and where the farmer smiles and doesn't gripe about everything. So the idea is that you want whatever your dream is, in whatever your vision is for the kind of people, the kind of farm, the kind of thing that you want to get close to whatever that is. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what that looks like, what that feels like, what that experience is in your soul, in your heart feels like. And so, seek that out, find it, and invest your time and interest, and you'll never regret You'll never regret spending time with mentors. You'll never regret that.
I love that. Okay. And on that note, we're going to wrap up. We thank Christine for sending in her questions. Encourage others. If you have questions, please email them to me. My email is in the description box. And thank you again for sharing this time with us. We look forward to spending this time with you each week. And we're looking forward to next week. All right. Bye-bye.